Webinars can be very, very powerful. Some people say they are dead. They are absolutely not dead. They're tricky. When you're looking at webinars, you need to be looking at your numbers as well. There's sometimes, as a digital marketing agency, webinars seem to choke or they don't work, and we have to do some pretty hard soul searching as to why this isn't working. You'll see as we break down a webinar, I'm going to give you some of the elements that you need to have to make your webinar compelling, do its job, and get people to buy from you. In your marketing, be testing out different offers and maybe... Welcome to the Results-Based Marketing Podcast, the podcast for business owners looking to leverage wildly profitable and cutting-edge marketing, lead generation, and lead nurture campaigns in their business. I'm Simeon Cryer, the founder of Automate Convert, where we've literally helped clients generate millions, hundreds of millions of dollars using the exact strategies that I'm going to share with you in this podcast. So if you want to automate, convert, and dominate your industry, you're in the right place at the right time. Let's get started. Thanks for being here. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. On today's episode, we're going to ask the question, is a webinar going to be a great offer for your business? Is it going to be a great tool and something that you should be using? We're going to break down some of the case studies that I've done with our own clients and give you a couple of options to consider to know whether a webinar is going to be a good fit for your business. I hope you get some really awesome value out of the episode. So first of all, why would you use a webinar? Well, if you've got a message that you want to get out one-to-many, a webinar, instead of going one-to-one and grind and getting one client at a time or two clients at a time, one-to-many is a much more leveraged way of leveraging your time and getting your message out and getting a whole bunch of clients with one delivery of one message. So webinars can be very, very powerful. Some people say they are dead. They are absolutely not dead. They're tricky. And I've seen webinars. Some of my clients have run webinars for like days at a time, like a 2-day webinar. I was just looking at probably the greatest of all time, my friend and first mentor in the digital marketing space, Russell Brunson. I just saw an older video of him when he was getting started. He did a 5.5-hour webinar. So when some people say, oh, people are time poor, they don't do webinars. Yes, they absolutely do. And if you want to limit your webinar to just a few words and just a few minutes, well, you're not giving people all that much reason. You're not really building a compelling case of why they want your product or service, particularly if it's a high ticket item. So yeah, it just depends on what you're selling. If you're selling something that's probably above the value of $3,000, then webinar to appointment is probably a good place to go. Like if you're selling a course, let's say you're doing like a free webinar, and I like the use of free webinar. I think that's really cool. And then you're selling to an application to work with you as a private client, and maybe you're selling $60,000, $100,000, a $20,000, $40,000 program. That's cool, but you can't sell that off the webinar, but you can sell the appointment. Do you know what I mean? There needs to be a qualified conversation at the end of a high ticket purchase. Let's say if it's north of $3,000, there needs to be a high ticket conversation with a professional closer who can sort of do a deep dive in the pains, the problems, and showcase the solution that your product or service or course has, right? If it's high ticket and you're going to have some urgency and scarcity. You'll see as we break down a webinar, I'm going to give you some of the elements that you need to have to make your webinar compelling, do its job, and get people to buy from you. That's the point of the whole thing. When you're looking at webinars, you need to be looking at your numbers as well. There's sometimes, as a digital marketing agency, webinars seem to choke or they don't work, and we have to do some pretty hard soul searching as to why this isn't working. And I'll give you a live case of what just happened with us and a client that we're doing a webinar with right now. We had clicks on an ad, for example, like we had 100 clicks. We didn't have anyone register on the page. And so I actually had a dream about this particular client, woke up at 2 a.m. and said, oh, I've got the idea. We've got all these clicks, but no one's converting on the page. Change the headlines. Why don't we just try something a little bit creative? It's an on-demand evergreen webinar. So why don't we just go straight to a lead format on Facebook so that it's frictionless. They don't have to type in their name, their email, and their phone number. It automatically populates that through a lead form, and then we'll just give them the webinar and we'll link it up that way. And all of a sudden we went from cost per lead being $280 a lead to $9 a lead, like night and day stuff, right? So sometimes you have to be a bit creative when you're testing and measuring different things. Nobody has a crystal ball. Beware of any agency that promises you results. We can promise a home run for our clients, Sometimes it takes us a few swings of the bat to hit it, right? Often we hit it out first swing of the bat, and we all love that. Champagne bottles get popped and everyone's very happy and we're celebrating, but it's not always the case in the real world. So just be careful of anyone making you outlandish promises and guarantees, because they're usually the people you have to run away from 100 miles an hour in the opposite direction. Hey, if you're a business owner making between 1 and 5 million a year and you want more consistent qualified leads to grow your business, then why don't we have a complimentary chat? I'm looking to personally invest $26,000 into 7 individual businesses right now who are serious about scaling. Book in a call with me and my team using the link in the show notes below to see if you qualify. Now back to the episode. Let's talk about if you should use a webinar or not. And so the conversation that I'm having with clients as we're test driving the webinar concept with a straight appointment concept. And ultimately, if you're selling a high ticket item, and these clients that we're talking about right now are selling an investment property, and it might be through a self-managed super fund. And if you're listening to this from America, that's your 401k that you can take charge of. It's a retirement thing. It's a fund that you can actually manage yourself and you can buy investment properties with, right? So the average value of a client to this client is somewhere between $35,000 and $42,000. So it's a high ticket sale for them. That's the revenue that they make. That's not the price. The price is about $700,000, right? So yeah, the value to them in terms of commissions that they make is around about $35,000 to $42,000. So we're asking, the goal of the webinar is to have a qualified appointment that has a client potentially who has been pre-framed and conditioned, and they are putting their hand up to have a conversation about purchasing whether or not an investment property is a great fit for them or not. So in your case, you've got to think about your product or service and what the process is. Now, for my clients, where the goal of the webinar is to have a qualified appointment. So we're split testing the webinar to an offer that just goes straight to the appointment. And so what we have to know is we need to be mindful of the numbers, right? Everyone who's successful in business has to know their numbers. So if we know that industry benchmarks are 1 in 3 people show up to a webinar, then we've got some numbers to work with. So if our cost per lead is, say, $10, we know that 1 in 3 people are going to show up. You've still got the lead. They just haven't showed up to the webinar. So you can give them the pre-recording. There's still a customer journey for them to have, whether or not they show up to the webinar. But essentially we'd say, okay, cost per lead is $10, $30 to have someone in the room. Okay, so the $30 to have someone in the room is then to have an appointment booked at the end of that to have a qualified conversation about purchasing. So the question is, can we do that more cost effectively through a webinar, or can we go straight to the appointment? So we're finding right now we're going straight to the appointment. We're getting leads in at about $21 straight to the appointment versus $30 to have someone show up in the room. Does that make sense? So yeah, we're evaluating whether the webinar pathway is a preferred pathway to lead nurture and pre-framing. And guess what we're doing? The appointments, we're using that pre-recorded webinar as a pre-frame anyway. So it's almost though the funnel doesn't matter, but we're using that webinar as a pre-frame. Hey, before we get on the appointment, it's imperative that you listen to this pre-recorded webinar, which will give you this benefit, this benefit, this benefit, and this benefit, and it'll help you be able to realize whether this is a good fit for you or not. And it'll give you some really awesome insights into X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense? So yeah, you need to, in your marketing, be testing out different offers, and maybe a webinar is a lay down misere for you. So I had a previous client of mine that was charging or wanting to charge $497 for someone to show up to a webinar. It's a really tall order to have a cold message go out to a cold audience who doesn't know who you are. They don't know your business, your brand, your personality, your values, right? And to say on first date, hey, how about you give me $497 to show up to a webinar? It's like you can't really do that. And so I was saying to him, let's do this for free, offer this for free, get people into your world, give them all the value and sell them the implementation, right? Sell them your high ticket $40,000 course. And the numbers on that were, when he tried to sell a $497 course, even though he dropped the price down to $97, people weren't buying it because there wasn't enough compelling reasons for them to do that because they didn't know him. When we did it for free, and he resisted this big time, he said, people who get it for free are bottom dwellers, they're not going to buy anything. And so we were 2 weeks out from the event, charging $97 and getting nowhere. The acquisition cost, by the way, of a $97 webinar, it was costing us over $400 to sell a $97 event. So we were going backwards at 100 miles an hour. I said, please, last 2 weeks, let's just see what the data says. I don't want to make anyone wrong. That's really bad marketing and communication. It's like, I understand what you're saying. Let's just see what the data says. Now the last 2 weeks out, why don't we just give it for free and we'll just see what happens? Will that be okay? Long story short is we got registrations for $20 per registration. 1 in 3 show up, $60 to have someone in the room. 5% of the people in that webinar, whether they were free or paid $97, the upsell was exactly the same. This is what the data showed us. Really exciting. 5% of those people bought a $40,000 product. So what that means is the number of people in the room cost us $60 to have someone in there for free, and 5% of them bought the $40,000 ticket. That means that everyone in the room is worth $2,000. Do you understand, right? So the revenue per person in the room, on average, that person is worth $2,000, given that 5% buy the $40,000 upsell. So webinars are powerful. They work really, really well. They're not always the best thing to do, right? So you've got to make a decision on whether you test that out or test it out and compare that to other offers, right? So the webinar is the offer versus going straight to the appointment. There's some of the things to think about. So guys, I hope that has been valuable for you in terms of giving you some insights as to whether a webinar is a good fit for your business or not. On the next episode, I'm going to break down what I believe are the critical success factors for having a compelling webinar that converts into profit for your business. So stay tuned. I can't wait to see you on that episode as well. Happy marketing. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to Results-Based Marketing. If today's episode gave you valuable insights into maximizing your marketing efforts, we'd love your support. Please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite platform. Let's keep the conversation going. Connect with me on socials at Simeon Cryer. All the links for me are in the show notes below. And happy marketing. Thank you so much for your attention.